Her hands were turning blue. Not the kind of blue you see in movies. The real kind. The kind that starts at the fingertips and crawls toward the wrist, slow and patient, like the cold has all the time in the world. Naomi Carter stood outside the cafe and tried to make herself smaller. 12 years old, gray coat with a zipper that wouldn't close, breath coming out in short, visible bursts that disappeared into the air before anyone could see them. Inside, the cafe glowed like a different planet. Yellow light, clean tables, people holding cups with both hands, letting the steam rise into their faces. She watched them through the glass and felt something twist in her chest. Not jealousy, not exactly. Something closer to math. The distance between her and that warmth wasn't just physical. It was measured in money she didn't have, in rules she'd been taught, in the careful space she'd learned to keep between herself and the world. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her shoes were too thin for this weather. The soles had worn down until she could feel the texture of the sidewalk through them. Rough, cold, unforgiving. A woman walked past her into the cafe, pulling a scarf tighter around her neck. The door swung open. Heat poured out for just a second, then it was gone. Naomi's stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon, a granola bar from the nurse's station at the hospital. The nurse had left it on the counter, turned away to answer a phone call, and Naomi had taken it without asking because asking made people uncomfortable. Asking made them look at you differently. She flexed her fingers, trying to get feeling back into them. The skin went from pale to pink and back again. She told herself she could leave. She'd told herself that 3 times already. But the warmth behind the glass felt close enough to touch, and the ache in her stomach made it hard to think clearly. Inside, Malcolm Hargreaves sat alone at a corner table. He didn't notice her. He was reading something on a tablet, scrolling with the kind of smooth, practiced motion that comes from years of processing information faster than most people can speak it. His coat was draped neatly over the chair beside him, expensive fabric, the kind that didn't wrinkle. His watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist. It cost more than most families made in a year. He liked this cafe because it was predictable. Same barista, same table if he arrived early enough, same ceramic cup, heavy and warm in his hands. Control before the chaos started. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. 3 messages from his chief counsel, 1 from his assistant about a board vote that wasn't going as planned. He silenced the device and went back to his tablet. Outside, Naomi took a breath. Her grandmother's voice was in her head, sharp and clear. Asterisk, don't talk to strangers. Don't let anyone buy you anything. Don't owe anyone anything. Asterisk. But her grandmother wasn't here. She was across town, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed, waiting for a social worker to decide how much longer she could stay. Naomi had spent the night on a plastic chair in the waiting room, clutching her backpack, pretending not to hear the nurses whisper about beds and funding. She'd left early. Before anyone could ask questions she didn't want to answer. Her stomach growled again. She pushed the door open. The warmth hit her all at once. It made her dizzy. She stood just inside the entrance, letting the door close behind her, feeling the heat seep into her coat. A few heads turned. People always noticed children alone. They noticed the scuffed shoes, the backpack straps that had been knotted and reknotted to make them shorter. She scanned the room quickly, looking for the person who seemed least likely to yell at her or call someone. Her eyes landed on Malcolm. He wasn't watching her. He wasn't watching anyone. He looked calm, contained. Safe, she thought. She didn't know why she thought that. She walked toward his table, each step heavier than the last. Halfway there, she almost turned back. But then her fingers brushed the edge of his chair, and it felt like a point of no return. Malcolm looked up. Irritation flickered across his face before he could stop it. He was used to interruptions, but he'd chosen this cafe specifically to avoid them. He saw the girl standing there, hands clasped in front of her, eyes lowered but alert. For a moment, his mind struggled to place her. She didn't belong to any category he dealt with daily. She spoke quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was effort behind it. She said she was cold. She asked if he could buy her a cup of hot milk. Not money, not food she could take and run with. Hot milk. The request caught him off guard. It was specific, almost modest to the point of pain. He hesitated. And in that pause, a dozen thoughts collided. Headlines about scams, liability, security protocols, assistants who handled these things so he didn't have to. The way one small act could spiral into expectations he didn't have time to manage. He also thought of his daughter. Grown now, living on the other side of the country. She'd once asked him for hot chocolate after a winter soccer game, her cheeks red from the cold. The girl in front of him did not look like his daughter. Not then. Not ever. People were watching now, pretending not to. The barista's eyes flicked between them, unsure whether to intervene. Malcolm felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not guilt. Not exactly. Discomfort. He told the girl to sit. He waved the barista over and ordered hot milk. The girl nodded, murmured thanks, sat on the edge of the chair across from him, as if ready to stand at the first sign of trouble. If you're still watching this, you already know something most people refuse to admit, that the distance between comfort and desperation isn't a gap you fall across. It's a line you stand on every single day. And most of us are one bad month away from being on the wrong side of it. The cup arrived quickly. Steam curled upward, fogging Naomi's glasses. She wrapped her hands around the mug and sighed before she could stop herself. The warmth traveled up her arms, settled somewhere deep. Malcolm watched her without meaning to. He noticed the way she drank carefully, blowing on the surface each time, the way she glanced at the door between sips, like she was already planning her exit. He asked her where her parents were. The question slipped out before he'd fully decided to ask it. Naomi froze, just for a second. Then she said her grandmother was sick. She said she was on her way to school. None of it was a lie. None of it was the whole truth. Malcolm nodded, already filing the information away, trying to decide what, if anything, he was supposed to do next. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet. He placed a folded bill on the table, more than enough for several cups of milk. He told her to keep warm. Naomi stared at the money. Her throat tightened. She hadn't asked for that. Taking it felt different. She could see the calculation on her own face reflected in the glass behind him. The war between need and fear. She pushed the bill back toward him. She said thank you for the milk. She said she didn't need the money. Something shifted then. The neat story Malcolm had already begun telling himself about a small kindness given and received cracked at the edges. He asked her why she was really there. The cafe noise seemed to fade. Naomi talked about the hospital, about the letter taped to their apartment door last week. Too many words she didn't understand but knew were bad. About how the school office had called social services after she'd fallen asleep in class one too many times. She didn't cry. She spoke the way someone speaks when they've had to explain the same thing over and over to adults who nod and write things down and promise to get back to you. Malcolm felt the weight of her words settle in places he usually kept empty. He knew about systems. He had built his life on them. He knew how they optimized for efficiency, not mercy. He asked her what she planned to do after she finished the milk. Naomi shrugged. She said she would go to school, or maybe back to the hospital. She wasn't sure. Outside, a security guard from a nearby office building stepped into the cafe. His eyes went straight to Naomi. He asked her what she was doing inside. Before Naomi could answer, Malcolm stood. He told the guard she was with him. The words surprised them both. The guard hesitated, glanced at Malcolm's watch, his coat, his posture. He nodded and left. Naomi looked up at Malcolm. Something like shock flickered across her face. She said she hadn't meant to cause trouble. Malcolm told her she hadn't. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Malcolm did something he hadn't done in years. He made a call himself. Not through an assistant, not delegated, not scheduled. He called his assistant and told her to clear his morning. He called his driver and told him to come to the cafe. He asked Naomi if she would like to come with him to the hospital. She hesitated. Every rule she had been taught screamed at her not to get into a car with a stranger, no matter how kind he seemed. But something in his voice, calm, unhurried, made her nod. The barista watched them leave together. She would talk about it later, to her coworker during the afternoon shift. She would say it looked strange. She would say she almost called someone. She would say she wasn't sure if she'd done the right thing by staying quiet. The car was black, sleek, the kind that didn't make noise when it moved. Naomi climbed into the back seat and sank into leather that felt like it cost more than her grandmother's entire apartment. The door closed with a soft, heavy sound, airtight, insulated. The world outside became muted. Malcolm sat beside her, already checking his phone. His driver pulled into traffic without asking where they were going. He already knew. Naomi watched the city pass by through tinted windows. Neighborhoods shifted. Glass and steel gave way to brick and boarded storefronts. She had lived here her whole life, but she'd never seen it like this. From this height, insulated from the cold and noise, it felt wrong, like she was looking at her own life from the outside. Malcolm glanced at her. She was gripping the edge of the seat, not out of fear, out of something else. Awareness, maybe, that this wasn't her world. He asked if she was okay. She nodded. He didn't believe her, but he didn't push. The hospital came into view. Gray concrete, too many windows, the kind of building that looked exhausted. The driver pulled up to the main entrance. Malcolm stepped out first. Naomi followed, slower, like she was walking into something she couldn't take back. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and something else, something heavier. Sickness and waiting and bureaucracy. Malcolm walked straight to the front desk. The woman behind the counter looked up. Tired eyes. Name tag that said Times Brenda *. Malcolm asked to speak to the administrator. Brenda blinked. She asked if he had an appointment. He said no. He said it wouldn't take long. Something in his tone made her pick up the phone. Naomi stood a few feet behind him, watching. She had been in this building dozens of times. She knew which elevators were broken, which vending machines ate your money, which nurses would let you sit in the waiting room after visiting hours if you were quiet enough. But she had never seen anyone speak to the front desk like that. Like the rules were suggestions. Within minutes, a man in a suit appeared. Polished shoes, tight smile. He introduced himself as the hospital's director of patient services. Malcolm shook his hand. He didn't smile back. He asked about Naomi's grandmother, about her care, about the timeline for discharge. The director hesitated. He asked how Malcolm knew the patient. Malcolm didn't answer the question. He asked his own instead. What was the hospital's policy on extended care for patients without sufficient insurance coverage? The director's smile tightened. He said it was complicated. He said they were doing everything they could within the constraints of the system. Malcolm asked what it would take to remove those constraints. The director blinked. Naomi watched the conversation unfold like she was watching a chess game she didn't understand but could feel the weight of. Malcolm wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't threatening anyone. He was just asking questions that had answers no one wanted to give. The director excused himself. He said he needed to make a call. Malcolm waited. Naomi sat down in a plastic chair, the same kind she'd slept in the night before. She asked Malcolm why he was doing this. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. He told her about his sister. She had been sick too. Years ago, poor, forgotten. She had fallen through the cracks of the same systems he now profited from optimizing. By the time Malcolm had the money and power to do something, it was too late. He had built his empire partly to outrun that guilt. Naomi absorbed this. Not just the words, but the weight behind them. She asked him if it worked. He didn't answer. The director returned. His smile was different now, softer, more accommodating. He said they could make some adjustments to the care plan. He said a social worker would be assigned to follow up. He said they would find a solution. Malcolm thanked him, polite, detached. As they walked toward the elevators, Naomi felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, not gratitude, something heavier. The realization that the system she'd been fighting against for months could bend. It just needed the right kind of pressure. And she didn't have it. But he did. Subscribe if you've ever realized that fairness isn't a principle. It's a price tag, and most of us can't afford it. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor. The hallway stretched out in both directions. Fluorescent lights, linoleum that squeaked under their shoes, the smell of cleaning solution trying and failing to cover something sour. Naomi led the way. She knew which room without having to check the numbers on the doors. Malcolm followed a step behind, watching the way she moved. Shoulders tight, head down. The posture of someone who had learned to make themselves invisible in places that didn't want them. They stopped outside room 412. Through the small window in the door, Malcolm could see an old woman lying in a bed, thin, gray hair spread across a pillow that looked too flat. Machines on either side, their screens glowing with numbers that meant nothing to him but everything to someone. Naomi hesitated before opening the door. Malcolm noticed. He asked if she wanted him to wait outside. She shook her head. She said her grandmother would want to meet him. She didn't say why. Maybe she didn't know. Inside, the room was smaller than Malcolm expected. One bed, one chair, one window that looked out onto a brick wall. Naomi's grandmother opened her eyes as they entered. They were sharp, alert, the kind of eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. She looked at Naomi first. Relief washed across her face, followed immediately by worry. She asked where Naomi had been. Her voice was rough, like it hurt to use. Naomi said she'd gone to get something warm. She said she was fine. Her grandmother's eyes moved to Malcolm. Suspicion replaced worry in less than a second. She asked who he was. Naomi opened her mouth to answer, but Malcolm spoke first. He introduced himself. Just his name, not his title, not his company. He said he'd met Naomi at a cafe. He said she'd asked for help, and he was trying to provide it. The old woman studied him. Her eyes moved from his watch to his shoes to the way he stood, comfortable in a space that wasn't his. She asked what he wanted in return. The question hung in the air like smoke. Malcolm didn't flinch. He said nothing. She didn't believe him. Malcolm could see it on her face. People didn't help for free. Not people like him. Not in her experience. Naomi sat down on the edge of the bed. She took her grandmother's hand, careful not to disturb the IV line taped to her wrist. She said it was okay. She said he'd already helped. Her grandmother looked at her granddaughter, then back at Malcolm. She asked him to sit. Malcolm pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the old woman asked him why. Not why he helped, why he cared. Malcolm told her about his sister. He told the story differently this time. Fewer details, more honesty. He said he'd failed someone once. He said he was trying not to fail again. The old woman listened. Her expression didn't soften, but something in her eyes changed. She asked if he thought money fixed everything. Malcolm said no. She asked if he thought it fixed anything. Malcolm paused. He said it depended on what was broken. She nodded slowly, like she was deciding something. Then she told him about Naomi, about the apartment they were losing, about the school that kept threatening to report Naomi for truancy, even though she'd never missed a day she didn't have to, about the caseworker who'd promised to help 6 weeks ago and hadn't returned a single call, about the systems that asked for paperwork they didn't have, meetings they couldn't get to, proof of things that shouldn't need proving. She said it with the exhaustion of someone who had fought bureaucracy her entire life and knew she was losing. Malcolm listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked what she needed most. Not what she wanted. What she needed. The old woman looked at him for a long time. Then she said time. Time to get better. Time to find a place they could afford. Time to figure out what came next without someone taking Naomi away while she did. Malcolm nodded. He asked if she would let him help with that. She asked what it would cost. He said it would cost her having to trust him. The old woman laughed. It turned into a cough halfway through. Naomi reached for the water cup on the side table. When the coughing stopped, the old woman said she didn't trust anyone. Malcolm said he understood. He said she didn't have to trust him. She just had to let him make a few phone calls. The old woman looked at Naomi. Naomi nodded. She looked back at Malcolm. She said fine. But if he tried anything, if he made things worse, she would find a way to make him regret it. Malcolm believed her. He stood. He said he would be in touch. As he walked toward the door, the old woman called after him. She asked his last name. He told her. She repeated it slowly, like she was filing it away, preparing to use it if she needed to. Malcolm left the room. Naomi followed him into the hallway. She asked what happened next. Malcolm said he was going to make some calls. He said things would move quickly once he did. She asked if that was how the world always worked for him. He looked at her, really looked at her. He said yes. Then he said it shouldn't. Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. She already knew that. Malcolm sat in the back of his car, phone pressed to his ear. The driver had pulled into a parking garage 2 blocks from the hospital. Quiet, private. The first call was to his assistant. He told her to contact the hospital's chief financial officer. He told her to arrange a meeting within the hour. He told her to make it clear the meeting was not optional. She asked what it was regarding. He said patient care funding. He said he would explain later. The second call was to his attorney. He asked about temporary guardianship laws, about housing assistance programs, about the fastest legal pathways to stabilize a family in crisis. His attorney asked if this was related to a company matter. Malcolm said no. It was personal. There was a pause on the other end of the line. His attorney had worked with him for 15 years. Malcolm didn't do personal, but he didn't ask questions. He said he would have answers by the end of the day. The third call was to someone Malcolm hadn't spoken to in 6 months. A woman named Dr. Renee Castellano. She ran a nonprofit focused on housing and healthcare access for low-income families. Malcolm had donated to her organization once. A large check, anonymous, tax-deductible. They'd met at a fundraiser where he'd been the only person in the room not interested in being photographed. She'd cornered him near the bar and asked him why he bothered donating if he didn't want credit. He'd told her credit was noise, results were signal. She'd laughed and said she could work with that. Now, he asked her if she had capacity to take on a case. She asked what kind of case. He described Naomi's situation, briefly, factually. Dr. Castellano was quiet for a moment. Then she asked why he was calling her instead of just writing another check. Malcolm said because a check wouldn't be enough this time. She asked what he wanted her to do. He said he wanted her to make sure nothing fell through the cracks. She said that was expensive, time-intensive. It required sustained follow-through, not just intervention. Malcolm said he understood. She asked if he was prepared to stay involved. That question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd been thinking in terms of problems and solutions, inputs and outputs, not relationships, not obligation. He said he didn't know. Dr. Castellano said that was honest. She said she'd take the case. But she told him something else, too. She said if he was going to do this, he needed to understand what he was walking into. She said systems didn't fail by accident. They failed by design. They were built to filter people out, to make help conditional, to require the kind of resilience and resources that the people who needed help the most didn't have. She said fixing one family's problem didn't fix the system. Malcolm said he knew that. She said she didn't think he did. Not really. She said people like him saw problems as puzzles, solvable, finite. But people like Naomi lived inside systems that were designed to keep them exactly where they were. And stepping into that world meant confronting the fact that his power had limits. Or worse, that it didn't. That he could move mountains for one person and leave everyone else buried. Malcolm was quiet. Dr. Castellano asked if he was still there. He said yes. She said she'd send over intake paperwork for Naomi's grandmother. She said she'd be in touch within 48 hours. Malcolm thanked her. She said, "Don't thank me yet." The line went dead. Malcolm sat in the silence of the car, phone still in his hand. His driver asked if they were heading back to the office. Malcolm said no. He said to wait. He stared out the window at the concrete walls of the parking garage. He thought about his sister, about the hospital where she died, about the doctors who'd apologized and said there was nothing more they could do. He'd believed them then. He didn't anymore. He wondered how many people died because the system said there was nothing more to be done. And how many of those people would have lived if someone had made the right call, asked the right question, applied the right pressure. He wondered if this was grief or guilt or something worse, the need to rewrite a story he couldn't change. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant. The meeting with the hospital's CFO was confirmed. 30 minutes. Malcolm typed back a reply. He said he'd be there. Then he opened his messages and scrolled to his daughter's name. They hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. Not because of a fight, just distance. The kind that builds when neither person knows how to close it. He started typing a message, then deleted it, then started again. He asked how she was. He said he'd been thinking about her. He didn't send it. He locked his phone and slid it back into his pocket. The driver asked again if they were leaving. Malcolm said yes, but not to the office, back to the hospital. He had a meeting to attend, and a system to pressure into bending. If you're wondering whether one person can actually change anything, you're asking the wrong question. The real question is whether one person should have to. The hospital's chief financial officer was a man named Gregory Holt. He had the kind of face that looked friendly in photographs and exhausted in person. They met in a conference room on the 2nd floor. White walls, long table, windows that overlooked the parking lot. Gregory sat at the head of the table. Malcolm sat across from him. No assistants, no lawyers, just the two of them. Gregory started with pleasantries. He thanked Malcolm for coming. He said the hospital appreciated his interest in their work. Malcolm cut him off. He said he wasn't there to talk about the hospital's work in general. He was there to talk about one patient specifically. Gregory's smile tightened. He said patient information was confidential. Malcolm said he wasn't asking for medical details. He was asking about financial barriers to care. Gregory leaned back in his chair. He asked which patient Malcolm was referring to. Malcolm gave him the name, Naomi's grandmother. Gregory nodded slowly. He said he'd need to review the file. Malcolm said he'd wait. Gregory made a call. Someone brought a tablet into the room. Gregory scrolled through it, his expression carefully neutral. Then he set the tablet down. He said the patient's insurance had lapsed. The family was behind on payments. The hospital had extended care beyond what they normally would, but there were limits. He said it sympathetically, like he regretted it. Malcolm asked what the outstanding balance was. Gregory hesitated. He said it wasn't that simple. Malcolm said it sounded simple. Gregory said even if the balance was cleared, there were questions about long-term care, about discharge planning, about whether the family had a stable living situation. Malcolm asked if money would solve those questions. Gregory said not directly, but it would open doors. Malcolm asked how much money. Gregory named a figure, not the outstanding balance, something larger, vague. He called it a donation to the hospital's patient care fund. He said it would ensure families like Naomi's received the support they needed. Malcolm understood what he was hearing. Not corruption, something quieter. The way institutions asked for money without asking for it. He asked if this donation would guarantee Naomi's grandmother received extended care. Gregory said it would help. Malcolm asked if he could have that in writing. Gregory's smile disappeared. He said these arrangements were typically handled on a case-by-case basis. Malcolm said he needed guarantees, not goodwill. Gregory said that wasn't how hospitals worked. Malcolm said then maybe hospitals needed to work differently. The room went quiet. Gregory set his hands flat on the table. He said he appreciated Malcolm's concern. He said the hospital did everything it could within the constraints of insurance regulations, Medicare reimbursement rates, and operating budgets. He said they were a non-profit. They weren't trying to turn people away. They were trying to survive. Malcolm believed him. That was the worst part. He believed Gregory wasn't a villain. He was just a man managing a system that required him to make impossible choices every single day. Malcolm asked what it would take to change that. Gregory blinked. He asked what Malcolm meant. Malcolm said, what if the system didn't have to choose? What if there was enough funding to treat patients like Naomi's grandmother without forcing them out the door before they were ready? Gregory laughed. Not cruelly, just tired. He said that would require a complete overhaul of how healthcare was funded in this country. Malcolm said he wasn't interested in overhauling the country, just this hospital. Gregory stared at him. He asked if Malcolm was serious. Malcolm said yes. Gregory asked why. Malcolm didn't answer that. Instead, he asked how much it would cost to create a program, something targeted, families in crisis, healthcare and housing support, case management, follow through. Gregory said it would cost millions, annually. Malcolm asked for a number. Gregory named one. Malcolm said he'd fund the first 2 years. Gregory went still. He asked if Malcolm was joking. Malcolm said no. He said he wanted the program operational within 6 months. He wanted oversight, transparency, quarterly reports. And he wanted Naomi's grandmother to be the first participant. Gregory opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. He said he'd need to take this to the board. Malcolm said fine. He said he'd wait for their answer. But he said if the answer took longer than a week, the offer expired. Gregory nodded slowly. He looked like a man trying to figure out if he was dreaming. Malcolm stood. He said he'd be in touch. As he walked toward the door, Gregory called after him. He asked why Malcolm was doing this. Malcolm stopped. He didn't turn around. He said because someone should have done it for his sister. Then he left. In the hallway, Malcolm felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, not pride. Something closer to exhaustion. He had just committed millions of dollars to a problem he barely understood, to a system that might take his money and still fail the people it was supposed to serve. But he'd done it anyway, because the alternative was walking away, and he'd done that once before. He wouldn't do it again. Malcolm returned to the cafe 6 months later. He hadn't planned to. He'd been across town for a meeting that ran late. His driver suggested a different route to avoid traffic. They ended up on the same street. Malcolm saw the cafe through the window. Yellow light. Same tables. He told the driver to stop. Inside, it looked exactly the same. Same barista. Same ceramic cups. Same corner table. It was empty. Malcolm sat down, ordered coffee, watched the door the way he used to watch his tablet. He wasn't waiting for anyone. But he was aware, now, in a way he hadn't been before. Aware of the people who walked past the window. The ones who slowed down. The ones who looked inside and kept walking. Aware of the girl who stood outside for almost a minute before finally pushing the door open. She wasn't Naomi. She was someone else, younger, different coat. But the posture was the same. Shoulders tight, eyes scanning, looking for someone safe. Malcolm watched her approach the counter. watched her ask for something small, hot tea. The barista smiled, told her it was on the house. The girl looked surprised. She thanked her and sat down near the window. Malcolm didn't approach her, didn't ask if she needed help. He just watched, and wondered how many other people walked past her every day without seeing her. His coffee arrived. He drank it slowly. He thought about Naomi, about her grandmother, about the program that had launched at the hospital. It was working. Not perfectly, but it was working. 30 families had gone through it in the past 6 months. Not just housing, case management, legal support, healthcare coordination. Dr. Castellano sent him quarterly reports. He read every one. She'd told him something in the last report that stayed with him. She said the program was successful, but it was also a band-aid. That for every family they helped, there were 100 others they couldn't reach. That the system was still broken, still designed to fail the people who needed it most. She said if he really wanted to make a difference, he needed to stop funding solutions and start funding systemic change. Malcolm had read that line 3 times. Then he'd closed the report and hadn't responded. Because he didn't know how to do that. He knew how to solve problems, how to apply pressure, how to make things move. But changing a system, that required something different. It required staying in the fight long after the initial crisis passed. It required admitting that his power had limits, that money could open doors but couldn't rebuild the house. It required confronting the fact that the same systems that had made him wealthy were the ones keeping people like Naomi poor. And he didn't know if he was ready to confront that. He finished his coffee, left cash on the table. As he stood to leave, his phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. They'd been talking more lately, not a lot, but more than before. She'd asked him once why he'd suddenly started reaching out. He'd told her he was trying to be better at not disappearing. She'd said that was good, because she'd been trying to forgive him for the times he had. The message now was simple. Dinner next week? Malcolm typed back, yes. He slipped his phone into his pocket and walked toward the door. Outside, the air was cold, but not bitter, the kind of cold that felt manageable. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watched people pass by. Most of them didn't notice him. He was just another man in a coat. And for once, that didn't bother him. He thought about the letter Patricia had forwarded to him 2 months ago. Naomi had written it, never sent it directly, but somehow it had made its way to him. She'd asked if one person could really change anything. He'd read the letter a dozen times, never responded, because he didn't have a good answer. One person couldn't change everything. He knew that now. But one person could change something, for someone, and maybe that had to be enough. Malcolm walked back to his car. As the driver pulled into traffic, he thought about his sister again. He thought about the systems that had failed her, the people who had looked away. He thought about how he'd spent years building an empire to prove he was different, to prove he had control. But control was an illusion. He saw that now. The only thing he really controlled was whether he chose to see the people the system made invisible. And what he did after he saw them. That night, Malcolm sat in his office and opened his laptop. He drafted an email to Dr. Castellano. He told her he wanted to expand the program, not just at one hospital, multiple cities. He told her he wanted to fund advocacy, policy work, the kind of systemic change she'd been pushing for. He said he didn't know if it would work, but he wanted to try. Before he could second-guess himself, he hit send. Then he opened another email. This one, to his attorney. He asked about setting up a foundation, something long-term, something that would outlast him. He asked about structures that prioritized impact over optics, that measured success not in dollars moved, but in lives stabilized. He didn't know if any of it would make a difference, but he knew doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. He thought about Naomi standing outside the cafe, hands numb, asking for something as small as hot milk. He thought about how close she'd come to falling through the cracks entirely, and how many others did fall. Every single day. The system didn't see them, didn't care. But he had seen Naomi, and he couldn't unsee her. He couldn't unsee any of them anymore. Malcolm closed his laptop, stood, walked to the window. The city stretched out below him, lights flickering, lives unfolding. Some of them safe, some of them not. He couldn't save all of them. But he could stop pretending that wasn't his responsibility. He'd spent his whole life building systems that optimized for efficiency. Maybe it was time to build something that optimized for mercy. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be clean. It would require him to stay, to show up, to admit when he didn't have answers. But maybe that was the point. Real change didn't come from knowing everything. It came from being willing to stay in the uncertainty, to keep trying, even when the systems pushed back, to refuse to look away. Malcolm stood at the window for a long time. Then he turned back to his desk and got to work. Across town, Naomi sat at the small desk in her bedroom. She was doing homework, math. She'd never been good at it, but her teacher had started staying after school to help her catch up. Her grandmother was in the living room, reading. The apartment was quiet, warm, stable. They'd been there for 6 months now. Patricia said they could stay another 6 if they needed to. After that, they'd have to transition to something more permanent. Her grandmother had started looking for work, part-time, nothing too strenuous. Naomi had started tutoring younger kids at school. It paid a little, not much, but enough to help. They were building something, slowly, carefully. It didn't feel secure yet, but it felt possible. Naomi thought about Malcolm sometimes, wondered what he was doing, if he thought about her. She'd heard from Patricia that the program had expanded, that more families were being helped. She wondered if that was because of her, or if it would have happened anyway. She decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that it was happening. That night, before bed, Naomi stood at her bedroom window. She looked out at the street below, watched people walk by. She thought about the version of herself who'd stood outside the cafe 6 months ago. Cold, scared, invisible. She wasn't that person anymore. But she remembered her, carried her, and she made herself a promise. She would never forget what it felt like to be unseen. And when she had the power to see someone else, she would. Not because systems would change, they probably wouldn't, but because people could, one choice at a time. One moment of seeing someone who needed to be seen. One cup of hot milk. One phone call. One chance. Naomi closed the curtain and climbed into bed. Outside, the city kept moving. People kept struggling, kept surviving, kept falling through cracks that shouldn't exist. But somewhere in the noise, someone was choosing to see. And maybe that was how things changed. Not all at once, not perfectly, but person by person, choice by choice, until enough people refused to look away, until the system had no choice but to bend. Naomi closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she fell asleep without dreaming of the cold. The coat was too thin, the world was too cold, and the distance between them seemed impossible to cross. But Naomi crossed it anyway, and Malcolm answered. Not perfectly, not without hesitation, not without his own ghosts driving him forward, but he answered. And in that answer, something shifted. Not the system. Systems don't change because one person decides to be kind. But people change. Families stabilize. Cracks get filled, even if temporarily. The question was never whether Malcolm could save everyone. It was whether he would save anyone. Whether we would. Because the truth is, most of us have more power than we think we do. We just choose not to use it. Not because we're cruel, but because it's easier to look away. To tell ourselves someone else will handle it. That the system will correct itself. But the system doesn't correct itself. People do. One uncomfortable conversation, one phone call, one choice to stay when it would be easier to leave. Naomi didn't need a hero. She needed someone to see her. And when Malcolm finally did, the world didn't transform. But her world did. And maybe that's all any of us can really do. See the person in front of us and decide they matter. Not because it fixes everything, but because it fixes something. And sometimes, something is enough.